Thank you so much, President Ray. I'm humbled by your remarks and would reflect that the feeling is very mutual. I am who I am because we are CTS, and I'm humbly grateful for the relationships and studies that I had as a student and continue to have as an alum, both with fellow alums and faculty. I'm truly grateful for Chicago Theological Seminary, and I'm very pleased and honored by this invitation to share with you today. I wanted to focus my reflection today on parish ministry, in particular, responding to actually a conversation that Dr. Ray, you and I had not so long ago about the length of tenure in parish ministry. And I have been here at First Congregational United Church of Christ in Naperville for 11 years. I never expected to be here that long. But as I reflect on my experiences and conversations with others, I wanted to basically use this time of reflection to talk about the benefits of longer term pastorates. I realize there is probably a diversity of experience based on our particular specific traditions on this call. Some traditions do have a well-established tradition and expectation of longer tenured pastorates. Some have a very opposite experience. I come from the United Church of Christ, and according to the data that I was able to gather, unfortunately the most recent stats they have is from 2010, so it's a little dated. The average length of tenure for a UCC pastor then was 7.3 years. However, the median was 5 years, so a little statistical geekiness for you there. But basically, the median probably is the more helpful number for our reflection. For those of you that are interested in statistics, the tenure range at that time was anywhere from 0 to 42 years. So there are obviously a few on the upper end of this that are they're skewing the average quite a bit. But so just looking at the math, I'm already past twice the median for length of tenure within the United Church of Christ. So I am on the longer side, and within my own congregation, I'm one of just a handful that have made it past 6 or 7 years. There are, and I am in Naperville. I am across the street from one Methodist church and down the block from another Methodist church. For those of you Methodists, one came from the Methodist tradition, the other from the EUB tradition, and they just both became and stayed United Methodist churches. But since I've been here in my 11 years, each of them has had 3 different senior pastors. So there's been a real contrast between my experience and theirs. I have to confess before I get too full of myself here that we all know Jesus only lasted 1 to 3 years, and he moved around a lot. And we also know Paul moved around a lot too. So I may be way off here, but I'm going to go forward anyway, crossing my fingers and hoping that the Holy Spirit has my back, at least in some of this. But to be honest, there may be some benefits to shorter pastorates. It could help reduce dependence on certain personalities in the pulpit. It could encourage lay leadership to have more ownership and more of a stake in the health of the congregation, relying less on strong pastoral leadership. And it also could help a congregation to see a variety of personalities, of leadership styles, and of bodies in the pulpit. Some traditions are a little better at that than others. It is something that I have noticed that being particularly a straight white cisgendered male, I'm very intentional when I bring in guest pastors to make sure I bring in a variety of bodies so that people get used to seeing different bodies in the pulpit. I think that's really important, and a shorter pastorate may help to that extent. But I do think it does in total, I think it does tend to impact a congregation's sense of themselves to see their pastor leaving after 3, 4, 5 years over and over and over again. I think it's kind of like they can get the sense of, what are we doing wrong? Is it, what did we do to, or is there, and so it can kind of damage that sort of collective self-esteem. So in my humble opinion, and feel free to challenge me in the discussion afterwards, but in my humble opinion, longer pastorates are better, not just for congregations, but also for pastors. as I said, I've been here 11 years. This, for some of you, that might not seem so long if you come from a tradition that has a practice of longer pastorates. But for, again, UCC average, I'm twice the median. It takes a lot of time in ministry, as many of you I'm sure have experienced. It takes a lot of time, energy, and work to get to know a congregation. If you are lucky enough to be called by the Holy Spirit into a perfect church with no need to change anything, maybe that's not so important. But for those of us in normal churches, there is always something needing attention. Having time to get to know people, get to know their histories, the relationships with each other, and the relationships with your predecessors. This creates the conditions you need to build lasting, healthy, and effective change. In my case, there are some changes I could not see as some needs for change I could not see until I'd been here 4 or 5 years already. And there are still things that come up. And on the other hand, there are changes that I thought we'd figured out and settled, but have reappeared. And I'm still here to help with the new or different leaders and understanding why we changed in the first place. That's sort of my segue into something that I have become very grateful for in my own ministry, which is spending some time with family systems theory. When first introduced to family systems theory in Dr. Moore's class, God rest his soul, at CTS, I was not a fan at all. But having had some more time with it, particularly with the Lombard Mennonite Peace Center, which is a fabulous organization out here in the suburbs of Chicago. And I would direct you towards them if you want more info. They have various trainings for clergy that I have taken. I've taken their mediation training. I've taken their clergy clinic twice. And it's really excellent conversations. And particularly for pastors, what I find most helpful about it is it really helps us focus on self. And how are we managing ourself in a given situation, rather than, if we could just get rid of that jerk over there, everything would be fine. So I think it's a much healthier perspective by and large for pastoral ministry, at least for me. But within family systems theory, and I am not the right person to direct a conversation on family systems theory, although I'd be happy to try to respond to questions if you have them. But within that framework, a longer tenure gives you the opportunity to not just get to know the system, the triangles, the patterns, the players. It also gives you the chance to break up some of those patterns of dysfunction. Again, this is a longer conversation, but it gives you time to notice the patterns of cutoff, triangles, projections, scapegoating. And if you're doing your job right, or as well as you can, maintaining your non-anxious presence, or as Richard Blackburn, one of their instructors, reminds us, a less anxious presence. Because let's be honest, there's anxiety everywhere, especially now. If you're doing your job right, just staying steady, staying in relationship, that is a much more effective way to affect change, and especially lasting change, than giving up, going off somewhere else, or deflecting, and that kind of thing. Because what happens is basically there will always be reactivity in the system, and when you are seen to stay in relationship through that reactivity, that's what creates the change. If the reactivity pushes the pastor out, that can either further cement an unhealthy dynamic, which is usually a repeated pattern for that congregation's history, or you can start a pattern which your successors may not appreciate. Other benefits to long-term pastorates, I would say certainly the relationships. Funerals, admittedly, are a bit harder now than they were when I first got here, because I know these people and I love them. I have my own stories to share at the memorial, as opposed to just the stories I hear from family members. But those funerals, while emotionally harder, are much deeper and more meaningful and richer experiences for me. I am often grieving as much as the congregation. And so there are things that I need to do to sort of process my own grief in a healthy way, and still be present for the congregation and the time of memorial and follow up afterwards. But it is a rich blessing and experience to be a part of that. I've been able to confirm children that I've baptized. That's kind of a cool thing to do. I haven't yet married somebody that I confirmed, but well, I don't want to put the cart before the horse on that one. But anyway, there was another experience where we had a young adult who I had confirmed, and after they graduated from college, came back to me for some pastoral care, even though they hadn't really been active in church. But we had a relationship. They knew me, they trusted me, they were willing to be vulnerable with me. And if you've done much work with young adults, that's a big deal, to have a young adult think of their pastor as their first option. For some people, maybe it's less of a deal, but in a lot of contexts, that's a really powerful gift to give a young adult who's still exploring, to have a rootedness in a place where, with somebody that they knew growing up here. And relationships outside the church too. I want to stress that too. I mean, I have gotten to know city council members here in Naperville, other community partners, known very advocates for LGBTQ. I'm good friends with the executive director of an organization called Youth Outlook, and we've had wonderful conversations over the years, and sometimes it's longer between our conversations than we'd like, but to know that we're there for each other is a real gift, because the work that we're doing is not easy, and having partners and people that you can trust and know we're going to have your back is a big deal. But again, being in town in those community things, I have more of a stake in the community. I live here. I have lived here for 11 years. I'm more knowledgeable of the town than I was earlier. I know a little bit more about its history. I have the chance to earn a place at the table. I've gotten invitations in the past couple of years that I did not get before. Not sure if that's coincidental or not, but it's part of the picture. Of course, there are challenges, obviously, as well to longer term pastorates. One of the things that blindsided me a little bit, to be honest, was going through divorces in church. Divorce is hard on a church, because there's always the question of, does one person get custody of the church? And where do you fit in that? And the potential that you could potentially be seen to be choosing sides, particularly if it's acrimonious. Divorces of people whose wedding you performed. That was one that I was like, I did not see that coming. People, and so that can be just a part of the reality as well. People are human. The honeymoon in my case has been very long, and I've been very grateful for that. But you're human as a pastor. You're going to disappoint people at some point, and that can be a challenge. So, living through that, going back to the comment about staying through the reactivity, is really, really helpful. Segueing now to sort of how one sets oneself up for success, and these are just my tips. Again, we have time for discussion. I'd be delighted to hear all your thoughts and conversation as well. Every successful building starts with a good foundation, and with the caveat that I get the very different traditions, you have more or less say as a pastor about this than others. And my tradition, we have a search process that the candidates have a say and their own discernment as to where the Holy Spirit is calling them. So to the extent that you can, do your search process as well as you can. Pay close attention to the movement of the Holy Spirit. Prayer and discernment has been really critical for me. Is this a congregation that not only has something to learn from you, but do they have something you can learn from them? Is this going to be a mutually beneficial relationship between you? Is there space for both of you, you and the congregation, to grow? If they seem to, have nothing figured out and all you're doing is putting out fires all the time, that's going to be tiring. So if they have sources of strength and you can focus on that and draw from that, that's going to be a real benefit to you as their pastor. First Congregational Naperville is still a good balance for me. It started out, when I first was called here, it was sort of became clear to me that they had strengths where I had growing edges, and I had strengths where they had growing edges. And to a large extent, my experience is that that's still true. We still balance each other well. There's a lot of, you could have conversations around long-term couplehood and, opposites attract and all of that. I wouldn't go quite that far, because opposites may attract, but at least in marriage, they don't tend to end well. And I think it would probably be similar between a pastor and a congregation. You need to be in the same ballpark, at least. But, and, you know, any team needs different players on it, right? So that has stayed the case for me, and that's been one reason why it's been a fulfilling experience for me for this time. On a personal level, obviously, you know, we are not just ourselves. We are our relationships outside the church, whether that's a family relationship or social relationships or whatever, is the church located in an environment where you can thrive and the people that are important to you can thrive. You know, for example, my spouse has had to change jobs a number of times over the years for various circumstances. And this is a part of the world where she's been able to do that with minimal difficulty. So that's been a real asset for us. And the degree to which those kinds of stresses on your personal situation can be minimized, it's going to make your contentment and satisfaction in your pastorate much easier to manage. When you start, somebody told me a long time ago, never do a job you don't want to do for your whole tenure. So with that in mind, for an example, I do not know how to run the dishwasher in our church kitchen, and I have no intention of learning. I do not know how to light the boiler. I don't know how to fix the copy machine. Because I don't want to be, well, you know, Reverend Marco was always the guy that did that. And, you know, I'm laughing a little bit about this, right? It's a little bit funny. And I imagine any of us who've been around church for any length of time know exactly what I'm talking about, if you haven't already heard that advice before. But I got another piece of advice early on, that to remember that your time as a pastor, if you work it out per hour, is probably the most expensive staff member in a church environment. Really, no matter how the size of the staff, typically the pastor gets paid more than any other staff member. In a lot of circumstances, you're the only paid person, or you're the only full-time, or whatever. In any case, when you're spending your time doing things that are outside of what you have been called to do as a pastor, you're not really exercising great stewardship of the church's resources when there's someone else that could do that task for perhaps way less money, or for free even. So I think it's okay to say no to those things that are not the best stewardship of your time, in light of the fact that your time is something that the church is compensating you for. That having been said, I have absolutely chased a couple of chipmunks out of this building. So sometimes, as I remember Susan Thistlethwaite saying a long time ago, the job is the job. Sometimes you just have to do something. But generally speaking, I think it's important and healthy to maintain good boundaries there. This next one, I'd like to dedicate to my dear friend, brother, and fellow alum, and I don't think he's on the call, but Nathan Dannison, if you're there, you need to hear this one. Nothing personal. Take your time off. Take your vacation, take your sabbatical, take care of yourself. And this is talked about a lot. In my experience with colleagues, we're much better at talking about it than actually doing it. My humble opinion, I feel like taking care of myself is my responsibility, not the church's. It helps that the church backs me up and supports that, but it's really my responsibility, I feel, to clarify my boundaries and to maintain my boundaries. For example, something I learned from Lillian Daniel, fellow board member. She was my seminary internship supervisor. She gave me a gift that year because I was the one who, when somebody was trying to schedule something with me, would always like hem and haw. It's like, oh, well, I was going to do this thing and I'm not, maybe I could move that around. And Lillian just said, don't do that. She said, just tell him you're not available. That's the line. I'm not available. You don't have to explain why. You don't have to hem and haw. If you have time carved out that is your personal time and all you're going to do is maybe, you know, go out to dinner with your beloved person or spend some time with your kids, or even just you need time to go for a walk in the park and that's on your calendar, you don't have to tell anyone why you're not available. You don't owe them that. Just say, I'm sorry, I'm not available. And at the same time, offer other alternatives. Here's when we can do this. Here's when I am available. but don't apologize for establishing boundaries. There's a great meme that I saw just a few weeks ago that said, the only people who get upset when you set boundaries are those who benefited from you having none. Remember that. The only people who get upset when you set boundaries are those who benefited from you having none. That's important. All of that said, you know, as I sort of alluded to a second ago, stay non-anxious. Don't get upset with people for forgetting what your day off is. It's not, at least in my opinion, it's not their job to remember what your day off is. It's your job to protect your day off. And I have seen that too, where pastors start resenting people for daring to call them on their day off. Just don't answer your phone. Let it go to voicemail. Check the voicemail. If somebody is dying or in the hospital, get back to them. If it can wait till tomorrow, and it almost always can wait till tomorrow, let it wait till tomorrow. They'll be fine. You know, again, I'm standing on the shoulders of giants. One of the best pieces of advice I got about ministry is, and if you've been in my class, you've probably heard me say this, when you're working with human beings, you're never done. When you make widgets, you make the widget, you put it in a box, you ship it off, you're done. When you're working with human beings, there's never a point where you can say, okay, I think we're done here. Because it's relationship, it's ongoing. So at some point you just have to stop, go home. Go take care of yourself, be with your family, call a friend, whatever you need to do. Come back tomorrow. It will be here waiting for you. It's okay. So that's important. Don't be shy about asking for what you and your family need for you to thrive. This kind of goes a little bit back to the beginning conversation, but the benefits and compensation you need may differ from your predecessor. And they may differ from your successor. And that's a gift you can give the congregation, even if you do stay in a long time, to just remind them that different strokes for different folks. For example, parental leave. I've been in a lot of conversations with colleagues, especially, you know, I'm no longer as young as I used to be, but there was a time I was heavily involved with a network of younger pastors in UCC, and we talked a lot about parental leave. Big issue, big justice issue, super important. But to be frank, when I came into this position 11 years ago, we'd had 2 kids already. I didn't know if we were going to have a 3rd kid. And so I was offered 2 weeks parental leave, and I didn't really think much about it at the time, because I didn't even know if I was going to need it, but that sounded okay to me. A lot of dads, to be honest, a lot of dads have less than that, if anything. When we did end up having our 3rd child, I, of course, took the time off. But I think my wife was happy for me to get back to work after that 2 weeks was over. I think she's like, okay, you're done here, go away. But for us, it was a 3rd child. We'd been through it a little bit. We kind of knew what we were getting ourselves into. So that was okay for my family. That may be entirely inadequate for another situation. So it is important to sort of recognize these things when you're having these discussions, to say, you know what, for the record, you know, an appropriate level of parental leave would be 6 weeks or whatever it is in different contexts. But you could say, you know what, for my needs, I'm willing to give up some of that. Or if you are sure you're not going to have children or adopt children, that may be another thing you might negotiate or something, or sort of trade for something else. Because what's most important is, do you have what you need to really thrive? Last year, after my 10 years anniversary, I thought, you know what, it'd be delightful to have a huge raise, but church is church, right? So what could I ask for that might be a benefit to me and my family, and wouldn't cost the church a great deal of money? And I got extra vacation time. So I asked for a couple weeks more vacation, and I got it. And again, it's easier to ask for something like that after you've already given 10 years of service to people, and they're more willing to do things like that to keep you happy, assuming things are going well. Other thing I would offer as a suggestion is adapting your goals. This may be obvious, but adapting your goals to changing circumstances. Typically, when you start a new pastorate, there's a job description, there's goals or projects that the congregation's excited about bringing this new pastor in to work on. But once you maybe get that program or whatever it is to the point where you kind of hoped it would be, you might want to do something different. And so having that flexibility in conversation with the appropriate bodies in your congregation, obviously, to say, you know what, I came in here to establish a youth program and it's up and running and it's great. Do you mind if I step and prioritize into maybe seniors ministry or something else? You know, you want to obviously do that in collaboration with your congregation, but that kind of thing helps keep you from getting bored. And it also is good for the congregation, because habitual behaviors can get stagnant over time for the congregation as well as for the pastor. It's kind of come into some conclusion here and give us some time for conversation. I would, you know, the thing that is most important that I learned a long time ago was how important it is that congregations want to love their pastors. I have heard awful stories about relationships between pastors and congregations, heartbreaking stories, stories that really pissed me off. Some more recent than I'd like to imagine. But at the heart of congregational ministry, I still believe that one of the reasons why things go so wrong is because congregation members, church folks really do want to love their pastors. And your most important job is to love them back. When that's clear, that you really do love your congregation and they love you, that makes everything easier. When that's clear and well established, you can be more free in the pulpit. They will be more forgiving. And you can and they will listen more attentively to you because they know you, they love you, they trust you. You can have far more influence in all aspects of your ministry when you get to that point. Social justice is huge for most of us. We're CTS people, right? That's a big part of it. Congregants want to be loved by their pastor, not so hot on feeling judged by their pastor. So, and I want to make this point that this may make some of us in our beloved CTS ethos twist a little bit, because we're all about being prophetic, right? But I'm just going to tell you, in local church ministry, it does not matter how right you are and how wrong they are. You will not be effective at transformation if they don't believe that you love them. It has to start with love and relationship before you can move and transform anything. That said, and I can't make this point because I have Don Clark's eyeballs looking at me from the back of my head. Yes, you can have much more influence in all aspects of ministry when it's clear that you love your congregation and they love you. This is sacred. Do not abuse this trust. If you do, you will break the congregation potentially for years to come. You have to stay humble and faithful and transparent and remember your own humanity. Use your power for good. Don't be afraid of using your power for good, but use it for good, for the benefit of the people, and use it in love. When you do that, this loving relationship, when you experience it in longer term relationships between pastors and congregation, it stabilizes the systems. It helps provide a sense of consistency and continuity that many people, that's why a lot of people come to faith, for a sense of consistency and continuity in the midst of what can feel like an incredibly chaotic world, especially now. Having that stability and contributing to the increased collective self-esteem of the congregation can not only do wonders for that group of people, for that community, it can also help you too. It can help stabilize your own self in your ministry and all of that. So with that, I will thank you for your kind attention and open it up to discussion, comments, things people want to add.
Well, let me thank you, Mark. And let me ask you a question.